2 divided by 0 equals 1. Book 1, Walks in Blood, by Mamie LeSans. Take a walk with me along the tapestry of pain, through the warp and woof of despair. But have a care, my friend, not to stay too long, lest this wilderness I walk in embrace you in its prickly arms. Then here with me you'll stay, dear child, forever and a day. The young man had been following the stranger for some time. He had dried blood on his hands and forearms, as well as the small of his back and the back of his legs. A cloud of speckled flies was feeding on the man, but he didn't seem to notice. He walked steadily, despite some apparent stiffness in his right leg. He was wearing only a breechcloth and carried a sheathed knife on one hip. The younger of the 2 hunters signed to the older one that they should get ahead of the man and make for high ground. They started heading for a ridge that climbed steadily on their right. The younger one carried a bow. They moved swiftly. When they had gained higher ground, they looked behind them and saw the man approaching. They stayed low to the ground, slumped in awkward watchfulness behind a stand of bushes. The young one had already fitted an arrow to his bow. He looked at the older one, who raised a hand to tell him to be patient and let the man walk past before trying a shot. The man walked with his head straight forward and seemed to be in a trance. The older hunter wondered how the man got to be so old, if he was foolish enough to walk into enemy territory alone and not even keep watchful and alert. The strange one walked by. The one with the bow pulled it to full tension before raising himself slowly over the bushes. He was a skilled marksman and led his prey slightly after sighting in on the middle of the back. He let the arrow fly. The moment he released the bowstring, the man with the dried blood on him darted forward with a few quick steps. The arrow whistled harmlessly behind him. The young one immediately fitted another arrow to his bow, but he lowered his weapon suddenly. Instead of running for cover, the man had turned to face them after dodging the arrow. He continued moving, walking backward. He unsheathed his knife and held it at an angle over his head. He waved at the hunters with his other hand, the back of it facing them, the fingers pumping in a come here gesture. The man wore a perverse grin of delight. The 2 were so unnerved by his strange behavior that they immediately left the scene. They did not speak on the way back to camp, but they had plenty to say once they got there. We saw a strange man, an enemy, walking by the green stream. He just kept walking and walking, all alone, One Foot said, his voice full of puzzled excitement. He was covered in blood and the speckled flies were feasting on him, but he did not stop to smear himself with mud to keep them from biting him, Gunsmoke said. We trailed him, and One Foot took a shot at him. The shot missed. One Foot shot his friend a look that didn't. The shot was true. Everyone knows I shoot well. The man felt the arrow coming at his back and moved. Gunsmoke conceded the point. He moved, but he didn't hide. He pulled his knife and walked backwards, waving to us to come to him to fight. He never stopped moving. Did your mothers have any children that were smart enough to come out the right hole? Of course he didn't stop moving. The 2 turned around and saw that the voice belonged to Tattered Robe. He had been listening, a part of the considerable audience the excited pair had garnered. When he had everyone's attention, Tattered Robe said, Don't you know that you 2 just tried to ambush a walking man? The 2 just looked at him. A walking man! Don't they teach the young anything of value these days? Tattered Robe put exasperation in his voice. What's a walking man? One Foot asked. A walking man is a man who has been given great power by evil spirits. You 2 are lucky to be alive. A look of wonder appeared on One Foot's face, but Gunsmoke's eyes narrowed suspiciously. He had been taken in by the man before. A walking man is someone who asks to be given power by the spirits, and they give it to him, but at a price. One of the older members of the audience waved covertly to a friend. Tattered Robe's ramblings were not a thing to miss. What price? One Foot asked, already hooked. They call them walking men because they must keep moving or they will die. You see, The spirits trick them by giving them the power they seek, but not letting them stay still long enough to use it. Grunsmoke had heard enough. If they cannot stop moving, how do they sleep? He asked. Tattered Robe immediately replied, They must find a wide expanse of open land. The ones that survive learn to sleep while walking. Have you not heard of sleepwalkers? I thought everyone knew at least one. Tattered Robe stole a glance or two at his audience. A few of them had let their smiles escape onto their faces. He hoped they could keep from laughing and spoiling the fun. They cannot sleep by trees, of course, not without injuring themselves, and they cannot sleep by great bodies of water, not without drowning. But they can sleep by the streams. Wet feet never hurt anybody. Tattered Robe suddenly looked serious. I'm afraid you two need to worry about yourselves, not whether the walking men get their sleep. One Foot's eyes were wide. Why? You took a shot at a walking man. Did you not notice the way he pulled his blade and waved at you while walking backward? He was telling you he will remember you, that he will always keep you before his face. You boys will have to be careful. The next time he sees you, he will try to kill you. Grunsmoke said, Then One Foot should have taken another shot and killed him. Kill a walking man? That is no good. You cannot kill one without killing all walking men. Most of the people had gathered by now. Their finest storyteller was in top form. The young bowman shifted his weight nervously from leg to leg. Why wouldn't it have solved our problems to kill the man? He asked. Boys, this is why I was so shocked to hear you say you shot at a walking man. They all share the same mind. They all see with one eye. What one sees, all the others see. It is part of the spirit's curse. So now, by shooting at one walking man, you have angered all walking men. You have made not just one enemy, but countless ones. That is why I said to kill one walking man was no good. The others would remember you killing one, as if it was them you killed. They would seek their own slayers and kill their own killers, taking revenge for themselves. Poor One Foot could take no more. He put his hands over his ears and ran. Many in the crowd remembered why they tolerated Tattered Robe's laziness and womanizing. There were other ways to be valuable to your people than working and raising a family, and the ones shaking their heads and smiling or laughing knew it. This younger generation, Tattered Robe said with mock gravity, when will they see the importance of learning? Earth into Fire. The boy woke from his dream, continuing to scream and sweat and shake until his screams turned into hysterical crying. His mother tried to hold him, tried to comfort him, but he would have none of it. She asked him to tell her about his dream, but he refused to talk. His inconsolable state held until exhaustion took him, and he fell into a black slumber. I wish I had someone to comfort me, his mother thought. Then she curled up in the blankets that still smelled of her man. Not today. Not now. The boy had been scratching a picture of a horse in the dirt with his newfound prize when he saw Nose in the Wind. The man-child began walking toward the boy, wearing a cruel grin and a confident air. The boy stood up and put the rawhide necklace back on. He stood and waited for Nose in the Wind. As always, there was nothing he could do and nowhere he could run. His oppressor stood before him, a full head taller. What have you got? Nose in the Wind grabbed the necklace by the weighty object that hung from it, touching it and its wearer in a way that spoke of ownership. It is the claw of a great predator bird. I cut it off the bird myself. The boy gave his answer with pride. Nose in the Wind let go of the withered foot and flipped his forefinger under the boy's chin, forcing his head back. What did you do? Snag the bird from the air? The boy gritted his teeth. I found the bird, and now I wear its claw. Why do you wear it? To attract flies? I wear it to gain the power of the bird, and someday I will fly high above everyone and everything, and I will drop dung on your head. The boy spoke with prodigious hatred. He knew how this game always ended, and he had decided to skip the middle of it and go right to the end. "You fatherless whelp, you are dung!" Nose in the Wind pushed the wearer of the claw in the chest and knocked him backward. The boy kept his feet and began to tremble with something the larger boy mistook for fear. Nose in the Wind reached out and ground the bird claw into the smaller boy's chest. Blood began to well up in the scratches that were made. Those who were watching the two saw the bleeding boy look toward the ground. They assumed the smaller boy was going to accept the abuse, as all the young ones knew if you resisted him, Nose in the Wind would beat you mercilessly. But the boy with the claw wasn't looking at the ground. He took a half step backward and sprung off his left foot, kicking Nose in the Wind squarely in the side of the knee with his right. The large boy's left knee bent inward from the side in a painful dislocation, and he went down in a heap. He rolled on the ground, clutching his knee and screaming. Many who saw it thought it was the second kick that killed Nose in the Wind, the one that hit him in the temple, because when it landed, the screaming stopped. But the wearer of the claw didn't. He continued to kick his longtime tormentor in the head and side until 4 of the men pulled him away. They held him, each by a limb, while he thrashed around yelling in some horrid, guttural language. His fury was such that when he was finally still, all 5 of them were exhausted. A shocked hush fell on everyone, and the only sound heard was the small boy weeping quietly. The people there stood frozen, waiting for reality to come back and undo the unnatural thing they had just witnessed. No one checked to see if Nose in the Wind still lived. The people knew they had just witnessed a killing. They knew the large boy would never bother anyone again. "The one with the scorpion foot must be punished." Little Bear's voice was emotional. "My son's death should never have happened. Why is my son dead? Tell me, why is he dead?" No one wanted to answer Little Bear, but someone needed to. Someone needed to tell him the truth. "I take no pleasure in speaking of the dead, Little Bear, but my boys suffered at the hands of Nose in the Wind, more than once." Little Bear looked at Old Beau with careful scrutiny. Before he could respond to him, another man spoke. "My son was also beaten by Nose in the Wind. I did not speak of it to you, Little Bear, because I wanted my son to learn to take up for himself. The young have to work these things out for themselves before they replace the old." The speaker looked around the circle. "Us." Many found humor in Pale Tree's last statement. Little Bear did not. "You can laugh. You still have your sons." An awkward moment of silence passed, and White Hand decided to fill it. "This is a loss. Nose in the Wind would have been a help to this people. His size and strength could have been useful in time of war. He might have become a valuable warrior." "A warrior needs more than size and strength, White Hand," Pale Tree said. "What are you saying, Pale Tree?" Little Bear's voice was angry. "It does not take great courage to beat those half your size." Buffalo Hair spoke. "We are not here to speak poorly of Nose in the Wind. We are not here to decide what makes a man a warrior. We are here to decide what to do with the scorpion-footed one." "He should be cast out," Little Bear said, in a voice that shook with finality. "You want him exiled for taking revenge on someone who beat him?" Hides in the Rain said. "Nose in the Wind had behaved poorly, and his behavior turned on him and did him in." Hides in the Rain had just been accepted into the circle of men. He was only a few summers older than Nose in the Wind, and had suffered at his hands. "Behaving poorly is reason enough to merit killing?" Little Bear said. Hides in the Rain looked at the men gathered together before speaking. "I did not say your boy deserved to die. I said that he brought about what happened to him. The only one who brought it about was the scorpion-footed one. He must pay for what he has done. He is not fit to live among us. Who will anger him into killing them next? What sort of a man will such a one become?" Little Bear's words came out all at once. More murmuring and low discussion was heard. Many wanted the young killer punished, but many also had sons that were Nose in the Wind's age. Argument broke out, and though weapons were not allowed in the circle of men, Red Knife had heard enough. He raised his hand, and it got quiet. What we saw with the killing of Nose in the Wind had nothing to do with revenge or bad behavior catching up to someone. What we saw was a natural force, like lightning and fire, like thunder and rain, like the wolf and the bear. Red Knife looked around the circle from face to face. How many of you think you could kill me without a weapon? No one even looked him in the eye. Not many there thought they could kill Red Knife with a weapon. That boy killing Nose in the Wind would be like one of you killing me with your bare hands. The chieftain paused to let the thought sink in. To punish him would be like punishing the spirits who gave him the power to kill someone nearly twice his size without even a rock. Red Knife looked at Buffalo Hair and wondered why he had found the words and the medicine man had not. There is also this. Speckled Hawk is only shortly gone from amongst us. I will not allow harsh judgment to wipe out a good man's seed when that man cannot speak for his own. No one opposed Red Knife's judgment. It was something people were slow to do, even when he didn't have a good argument. The boy walked, kicking weeds and stones as he went and crying in bitter, intermittent sobs. He had just wanted to play. He didn't want the others to be afraid of him, as they had been afraid of Nose in the Wind. He wasn't like him. Coming back from one of his walks, he had seen the other children playing at sticks. He then immediately ran to get his, a special one with a wide fork at the end of it. He watched the young ones chase after the old buffalo hair ball for a while. One would roll the ball with his or her stick while the others tried to take it away using only their sticks. Hands and feet were not allowed. The boy watched the other children slamming into each other raucously. It could be a rough game. They were all intent on their play, laughing and joking enthusiastically. The boy ran up and gained control of the ball. He then began to run along laughing, as the others had laughed. Before long he realized that no one was vying with him for his hide-covered prize. He stopped and looked around. All the other children were standing there holding their sticks and looking at him with expressionless faces. He looked at them and understood in an instant. They were afraid of him. They were afraid to play such a physical game with the one who had gotten rid of Nose in the Wind. The boy immediately threw down his stick and walked back out of camp. He was angry and bitter, but he felt other things he couldn't understand. Did they prefer Nose in the Wind to him? Did they like it better to play sticks with someone who would actually beat them with the stick? Suddenly the boy realized he was not walking alone. He turned around and saw that Rain Cloud was walking behind him, closing the gap fast. He waited for his uncle to catch up, thinking, what does he want? I saw what happened, Rain Cloud said as he walked up. Walk with me a little while, and we will talk. His voice seemed kind, so the boy shrugged. His uncle had scarcely said a word to him his entire life, but if he wanted to now, so be it. At least it interrupted his crying. Your father was a good man. I was with him when the Shoshone killed him. He died bravely. I had raided and gone to war with him many times, and never had any complaints with him. The boy looked up at Rain Cloud, stunned. No one but his mother had ever spoken to him about his father's death. Speckled Hawk cared for you in his own way. More than once, before we engaged an enemy, your father made me promise to take care of you if he was struck down. He made me take an oath that I would teach you to become a proper member of your people. How did my father die? Rain Cloud stopped walking, a little taken aback by the question. In a brief flash, he saw the skinny one sinking the tomahawk yet again. We underestimated the number of Shoshone we would encounter that day. We trailed a few of them, not knowing that they would be meeting another, larger group. By the time we realized that we were outnumbered, the snake people got wind of us. We had trailed them too closely, so soon they were upon us. Speckled Hawk killed two, but a third struck him where the neck meets the shoulder. He struck him from behind. We lost 3 legs and Black Eagle as well. I was lucky to escape with a few others. I was lucky to run like a scalded dog, Rain Cloud thought. The man started walking again as well as speaking. I cannot take Speckled Hawk's place, but I can teach you a few things you may need to know. I can teach you to track the deer and the rabbit. I can teach you to notice the things around you, and I can teach you to use the bow and the lance. But I cannot teach you to track well and shoot what you trail. I cannot teach you to smell an enemy and feel his presence, and I cannot teach you to know when the weather will change and how to deal with women. Those are things that a man learns over time, and for some of those things, there never is enough time. The boy looked soberly at his uncle, and the two kept walking. The buffalo are here. I have seen many buffalo. I have seen a great herd. Hides in the Rain shouted the words as he rode into camp. He had been scouting to the south, almost to the river, when he stumbled upon the great herd. In truth, the herd was medium-sized at best, but perhaps his words were a reflection of the people's need. They were starving. Game had suddenly become scarce, and with winter closing in, a move would be risky. What if they got caught in an early winter squall? What if they were stuck in country poorer than their current home? All the signs pointed toward the hard weather that was coming. But how much longer could they eat the scrawniest of their horses and the unluckiest of the camp dogs? A decision was begging to be made. So Hides in the Rain's news was doubly welcome, not only because it meant a dependable food source and buffalo robes to warm them, but because it also meant the lifting of the burden of decision. The children ran and skipped alongside Hides in the Rain's mount, and the adults received his news with gladness. Bring in and tie your horses. Women, whet your knives and put an edge to your stones. Men, sharpen your arrows and hone your lances. Tomorrow we hunt the buffalo and take of its flesh and the fur of its hide. You're not my comrades. Scorpion Foot watched the men dance and sing around the fire. He was a part of the Hunters' Society, but he refused to dance with them. They would never accept him before, and he was sure they only accepted him now because they knew of his skill with the bow and the lance. They were still the same people who had avoided him before or refused to play with him as children, and so he refused to join them now. Scorpionfoot would soon be living through his 17th winter. Since that first killing when he was but 12, he had striven for some form of acceptance, but he had never gotten it. It was as elusive to him as a trout in the shallows, and he had sworn some time ago that he would reach for it no more. Sometimes he felt shame that he wanted so badly for others to like him, but that desire had yielded some good things. It had helped him to become a first-rate tracker and an accomplished hunter. It had given him the discipline he needed to practice every day with his weapons. When he was younger, he thought to win the others over by showing his skill and bringing them game. Many times he had ridden into camp with an antelope or a deer slung over his mount. Then he would give the prize to a family for their supper, and more than once, after accepting the meat silently, they did not even offer to have him eat with them. Now he knew better. If people did not trust you or like you, bribing them only made them feel more scorn for you. He watched old Buffalo Hair don the buffalo hide and head, and then dance vigorously as the others clapped their hands and stomped their feet. Scorpionfoot had heard it said that in his younger days, Buffalo Hair would actually walk among the buffalo in just such a guise, and, if the situation called for it, the shaman would try to lead a herd toward a ravine or bluff. Then the other men would whoop and yell at the hindermost part of the herd and stampede it toward the man in the buffalo skin. Buffalo Hair would then jump behind cover, such as a large rock, and the herd would rush off the precipice and the killing would be easy. The hunters had settled down now and quietly smoked. They told stories, and though Scorpionfoot longed to join them, he did not. But he listened to the story of the buffalo woman, a story he knew well. He waited for the part where the woman's father was brought back to life under a buffalo robe after being trampled by the great beasts, and then he went to his lodge. He knew the others would soon follow. They would need their rest for the next day's labors. Little Bear walked into his lodge and laid down. but found sleep to be far from him. He knew he needed to sleep more as he got older, yet he slept less. His wife had gotten old as well, and since she had not given him a son to replace Nose in the Wind, he had taken a second one. And though Slowbrow was younger, she had not given him any children. And now he had two wives who hated each other and would probably kill each other one day. Tonight he slept with Slowbrow. The two would not sleep in the same lodge, and Little Bear didn't want them to. They might end up killing him by mistake if one of their scraps broke out. Little Bear had seen Scorpionfoot lurking outside the fire earlier as he himself sat with the men and smoked. He had sworn revenge on Scorpionfoot for taking away from him the pride of his life. He did not blame the men who refused to punish him when he was a boy. He did not blame himself for his current marital troubles. He put it all on Scorpionfoot. If Scorpionfoot had not killed his boy, his life would be less of a trial. He may have sworn to spill Scorpionfoot's blood, but he could not kill a child. Surely he had wanted him cast out, but throwing a child to the wolves and feeling one's blood pour onto your hands were two different things. So he had waited until Scorpionfoot grew to manhood. In that time, hate had festered in him, and he no longer remembered his boy as a slow-witted bully and a lout. He no longer remembered any of the bad things about the boy, only that he was his son and that Scorpionfoot had killed him. And so Nose in the Wind became a martyr in his eyes, killed for no cause he could think of. Yes, Little Bear had waited and watched Scorpionfoot grow to be a man, a very capable and frightening one. He would not admit to himself that he feared the cold young man. He merely told himself that he had gotten too old to raise a hand against Scorpionfoot. But Little Bear could not loose himself from the hatred that he felt for him. And so, that night, the night before a very important hunt, he thought of a way to even things. He saw the plan in pictures in his mind. He rode to the left of the surround, the same side as Scorpionfoot. He saw himself shadowing the young man as they rode alongside the herd. He saw Scorpionfoot intent on his kill, and he saw himself ride up beside the young killer and kick him off his horse and into the buffalo herd. Scorpionfoot would be trampled to death, just another casualty of the hunt. Little Bear smiled to himself. After all, unlucky things happen to people all the time. The people woke before first light and gathered their tools and packed their horses. Even though the buffalo were a considerable way to the south, the camp, which was in a good place to winter, would stay. But all the people would go, and everyone who could help with the slaughter and the skinning and dressing would. Red Knife sent 2 scouts ahead, 2 behind, and 1 to each side of the caravan before it got moving. They would give the people warning if enemies had chosen this untimely morning to mount an attack. Scorpionfoot was one of the scouts sent before them, and he ranged far to the east. When he looked back, the people were just a black caterpillar crawling across the plain. He felt excitement and deep hunger, a hunger for satiety, not just a full belly. He, like the rest of the people, wanted to feel the fullness of knowing that his survival was assured, if only for a while, and a good hunt would give him just that satisfaction. The sun had cleared the horizon and risen red gold. The plain rolled on before Scorpionfoot as he rode, yellow-brown and dotted here and there with patches of green. Here and there was a scrub bush or a tree, but mostly the land lay open. The sun had climbed a little and it had warmed considerably. He looked down and noticed that he could no longer see his breath. His eye was not dull, and it picked up the glint of the river as it ran to the east. The water then ran almost due south. He was mesmerized by that distant sparkle for a moment before turning his head back to the south. He saw them. They were a dab of black to the west, reminding Scorpionfoot of the sight of his own people in the distance. He kicked his horse to a gallop to get a closer look. It was a sizable herd, full of bulls and good-sized cows. He pulled his horse's head up so as not to alert the buffalo, and guided his mount left to the river. The animal trotted to the water eagerly, and Scorpionfoot dismounted and drank with the beast. Then he rode swiftly back to the others. He wanted to shout his success when he reached the people, but he was cautious. A raised voice could travel a long way toward unfriendly ears on the plain. He trotted right up to Red Knife. I have seen them by the river where it bends to the east. Standing and holding his mount's reins in one hand, he pointed in the direction of the herd with the other. It is not far, less than half a morning's ride. He suddenly felt good. We will get there about midday, but it will not be too warm. It is a good day for a hunt, is it not? He looked at the crowd as he spoke, and then rested his eyes on Red Knife. The chieftain laughed softly at the young man's enthusiasm. It is a fine day to hunt the buffalo, he agreed. The rest of the people laughed and spoke excitedly, and Scorpionfoot wondered why he had bothered to be quiet a moment ago. When the scouts were retrieved and a plan was made, those who would not hunt were to stay close to where they were now and shelter behind an outcropping of rock. The hunters would come at the buffalo from the south, driving them toward the outcropping and closer to the deserted winter camp, killing as they rode. Hopefully the slain buffalo would fall close to the non-hunters, and the rock would keep the healthy beasts from injuring anyone. Farewells were said, and so were prayers. Everyone knew the hunt had its risks. But everyone also knew the rewards, and not just the practical ones that included a full belly and a good robe. Every man that could go went, and some of the boys bordering on manhood and considered sensible were allowed to go as well. The women and children would be left with only the infirm to guard them, but the risk was taken because the need for a successful hunt was so strong. The killing of buffalo was not a given and not easy. All who could shoot an arrow or wield a lance were needed. The hunting party began their journey, and all boisterousness was left behind. The excited tension that lived in the hunters held them all silent. This was a time for seriousness. This was their life. Red Knife saw the herd and looked for a place in the river that looked crossable. River crossings themselves could be dangerous, but a shallow part was located and the crossing was made without incident. It was a gamble, but the buffalo were close to the river, so if they were to be herded north, they had to be approached through a second river crossing. The hunting party had now looped around the herd in a half circle and stood watching them from across the water. As always, Scorpionfoot felt awe at the sight of the imposing creatures. He nervously checked his arrows once more. Red Knife stopped him and spoke in his ear. Go to the left and see if you can find a good place to cross. Scorpionfoot obeyed without pause. Red Knife then likewise sent Shortened Leg to the right. The chief shook his head. As could be expected, good fortune had faded a little. The river in front of the buffalo ran strong, too strong for many who rode with him. Red Knife hoped to find two suitable crossing places and come at the herd from both sides. The river would serve as a third party, blocking the animals from heading south. If the herd had been north of camp, all this strategy would have been unnecessary. They could have used the old way. They could have driven the buffalo off a bluff or a cliff. Unlike the monotony of this southern plain, north of camp the land became broken and full of character. True, it was less sporting, but the people were hungry, and sport was for those who could afford it. If they did things the old way, all the people's energy could be spent in butchering the animals, sewing the meat in the hides, and getting it back to camp. Riding alongside the animals and shooting them was exhilarating, but it was also dangerous and draining. Still, Red Knife had to be honest with himself as he watched Scorpionfoot approach. He preferred the hunt. Not far, Scorpionfoot gasped. He was breathing rapidly and his eyes were bright. Easy, boy, Red Knife said. Your chance is coming. He put his hand on the young man's shoulder, gladness welling up in him. The exuberance of the youthful was one of the things he liked and drew strength from. Shortened Leg came in just then, smiling as wide as the horizon. Red Knife then signaled to the hunters to divide into the two parties that had been chosen long ago. They mounted up, the newcomers falling in with whatever friends or family they had. Then Red Knife waved his hand over his head in a circular motion, and the two groups split apart from each other and headed out, feeling as if there was no other place to be and no other thing to do. Scorpionfoot led his party to the spot beside the sharp rock. It felt strange to him to head the group with so many in it who were older, but he was the one Red Knife had sent to find the crossing place. It was only logical for him to ride out front. Maybe Red Knife had chosen him to pick a crossing place because he was the one who spotted the buffalo. Who could know? The ways of the old were strange. He saw the big pointed rock and gestured at it with an open hand. The others would need him no longer, for the shallow place was plain to see. He turned his horse and let the others go past him. The buffalo seemed closer than they had when he picked the spot earlier. There was no wind to carry the hunter's scent. The animals tended to be heedless of a few riders, no doubt comfortable in the might of their numbers. But they were more than a few riders, and Scorpionfoot hoped the herd wouldn't take flight in the direction of the other group of hunters during or after the crossing. If Shortened Legs' place was an easier crossing and his hunters were waiting for theirs to get in position, a spooking of the herd could cause just such a thing. He stopped himself, the way his uncle had taught him to, when his thoughts became littered with too many ifs and maybes. He turned back toward his fellows, many of whom already had their horses waiting on the gravel bar, and put his mind toward the matter at hand. The shallow bar stretched far across the river, but it didn't run all the way to the other side. Scorpionfoot watched the lead rider jump off his horse. Foxear landed in water above his waist and leaned against the side of his mount to keep the current from washing him away. Then he slowly worked his way to the backside of his peril-blotched horse and grabbed 2 handfuls of its long tail. Foxear called to his horse, and the others watched the man flip back and forth like a fish's tail as the animal swam. Foxear made it across quickly. Soon he was standing on the far shore, waving to those still in the water to follow his example. The swift, deep water stretched only a short way before them, but Scorpionfoot sensed trepidation in many of his companions. He himself was not afraid, because he had crossed water as Foxear just had many times. One by one, with varying degrees of reluctance, each hunter entered the rushing water. Scorpionfoot saw many a young leg tremble as it launched its burden into the drink. The water felt cold as he took his turn. His mare kicked hard, like she wanted out of the water as soon as possible. When he climbed out of the shallows, he looked at the shivering mass of men. Then he looked back and saw the last one of them swinging behind his pony, bobbing and gasping for breath. He felt like laughing at the sight, which he found infinitely funnier than when Foxear had crossed. He realized he had forgotten about the possibility of them spooking the herd with their crossing. He looked at the beast sitting exactly where they were before, and thought, my uncle is a wise man. He found Eye of the Bird and asked him to look down river. He stood beside the man, who was not much older than he was. Scorpionfoot waited as Eye of the Bird positioned himself, stretching his neck and squinting his eyes. I see them, but the sun makes it hard. They are still crossing. Maybe they do not find as good a place, he said. Scorpionfoot was a little taken aback by the compliment, and finding no other way to acknowledge it, said, Then we will just have to wait. Have you a good feeling about this day as I do? I always feel good in the hunt, and we are all hungry, but after the killing and the first meal comes the work. Eye of the Bird suddenly walked away. Scorpionfoot thought that perhaps he wanted to enjoy the hunt and didn't want to talk. Maybe talking made Eye of the Bird think of the work instead of the pleasure of killing. Soon the other party was creeping toward the herd. They probably had been washed down river, away from their prey. They had most likely been forced to travel a little way, whereas Scorpionfoot's group were already close enough and just had to sit and wait. Nervous tension ran through Scorpionfoot in quivering waves as he trembled like a colt unhobbled in the morning. For some reason he could not calm himself, and when the other party finally got in position, he suddenly whooped and ran his horse toward the herd instead of waiting for Red Knife to raise the lance, a fact the chief would be sure to remember if the hunt did not go well. The others fell in behind Scorpionfoot, shouting, and the far party likewise charged. The buffalo that were wallowing in something, heaven knew what, that smelled stronger than they did, got to their feet. The other beasts began shaking their heads and snorting. Alarm spread through them, and the buffalo began to move as if they were one animal. The thundering feast began to sweep north, and the sound of their flight drowned out the cries of their foes. Some of the riders fell in behind the herd and ate dust, and some swept along its sides. The ones behind would ride alongside the herd as well after the stampede became intractable. Scorpion Foot went right for a young bull. The young man's heart was pounding in joyous elation as he sank the first arrow of the day nearly to the feathers. He looked at the end of the arrow sticking between the beast's ribs and whooped triumphantly. His victory was confirmed when he saw blood pouring from the bull's mouth. Scorpion Foot rode on. He did not need to see the animal fall to know that he had killed it. He rode forward and found another bull. He let go of his mare's mane and pulled another arrow from his quiver. He fitted it to his bow and then gathered up a handful of mane in his left hand again. He held the bow at the crux of the arrow with his right. He often wished he could ride on the right side because the shooting would be more natural for him, but he had no such thought now. He only saw his target. He focused his eyes intently on the side of the bull with the big horns. He swung the bow in his right hand over the horse's head and let go of its mane. He drew the bow to fullness with his left and began to aim for the beast's heart and lungs. The herd suddenly shifted closer to Scorpion Foot, and the bull turned on him, its head twisted sideways, its horns black and shiny. His uncle had taught him to let his horse take him out of harm's way, but his mare did not veer to the left as he expected. He took his eyes off the enraged bull long enough to look at his horse's head. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that one of the other hunters was riding right beside him, boxing him in, and he knew his horse wouldn't be able to get out of the way of the horns that were coming for him. He did not think it, but he knew that if the bull gored his horse, his own chances to escape hurt were small. His horse might even fall on him and kill him, or the bull might do the same if he lost his mount or leaped to the ground. Scorpion Foot knew all these things in his bones. So he did an audacious and fearful thing. He dropped his bow, grabbed his mare's mane, got his left foot under him, curling toes over spine, and he leapt off his horse and on to the back of the enraged buffalo. He landed behind the bull's hump, his legs splayed and his tender parts made more tender still. He immediately grabbed the wool of its mane and flattened himself against the hump. The bull, feeling the weight hit him, gave up the idea of opening the horse's side. He felt the thing on him, but he could not stop to get shed of it. The herd thundered behind him, and the beast still felt the impetus to run. The bull straightened himself from the murderous angle he had assumed and rejoined the herd. Scorpion Foot looked around him, still clutching the mane and digging his toes in. He realized where he was and what he had done when he saw nothing but rolling brown and black, heard nothing but the deep rumble that shook the earth, accentuated by the occasional clank of horn against horn, and smelled and breathed nothing but dust and the musky stink of the beasts. Sudden, ecstatic triumph shot through the young man and raised him up off his strange mount. He reached one hand in the air and yelled at the heavens until his lungs ached. The other hunters all stopped for a moment, stunned at the sight of a man riding in the middle of the buffalo with his hand and face outstretched. It looked as if the man was riding the whole herd, like he sat upon a thundering black robe that swept him off the ground. But when they had regained themselves and rushed their horses forward, they saw that the man was not riding a horse, that he rode the buffalo, herd and rider rising and falling, wave-like, with the rolling plain. And the strange rider continued to wave his hand and yell, his chest puffed out in triumph. All had given up the hunt and rode along following the impossible sight. Soon they began to shout in triumph as well, feeling the glory of one of their own. Scorpion Foot still felt the rushing ecstasy, but he also felt he had to act. He had to get off the buffalo's back before the herd stopped moving and his curious mount would be free to throw him off and dismember him at leisure. So he did the only thing he could do. Inching up on the animal's hump, he pressed his stomach flat, looking like a human landslide. He kept his face up and away from the pumping beast's bone-crushing skull. He dug his toes in again and grabbed a double handful of mane with his right hand. Stretching as far as he could, he looped his left arm over the buffalo's left horn and immediately contracted all his muscles at once. The bull's head turned to the left, and its body followed. The unlikely pair was no longer deep in the herd, So before the buffalo contracted its own mighty neck muscles, Scorpionfoot saw yellow-green instead of brown-black. The bull whipped his head around as Scorpionfoot released his hold and leapt for yellow-green safety. He hit the plain and rolled before smoothly gaining his feet and breaking into a dead run. He expected to feel the bull's horns pierce his back at any moment, but the buffalo rejoined his fellows, feeling the communal urge to flee stronger than rage at being ridden. Scorpionfoot was nearly trampled by a group of his own hunters who had been riding along with him. They pulled up just in time. All dismounted and many embraced him like a long-lost son. They all spoke with the wonder and excitement of children, their faces breaking under the weight of the joy they felt, and their eyes sparkling like that river in the morning sun. They all wanted to touch the buffalo rider to let themselves know that what they had just seen was real and not a waking dream. They picked him up and carried him around in a circle, singing his name and calling him the rider of the great buffalo. Scorpionfoot wept with joy. All the bad things that lived in him came out in those tears. It would live in his mind always, the greatest moment of his life, and he would often draw on the sweetness of this day to stave off the bitterness of others. For that moment everything made sense, everything was worthwhile, and the world hummed with life and wonder. As Scorpionfoot launched into the first telling, one member of his audience was more keenly interested than the rest. He listened intently, hoping desperately that the buffalo rider would not mention him by name. When the part came where the speaker would tell of his daring and soon-to-be legendary act, Little Bear began to tremble all over. I had just finished killing my first buffalo with one shot. Scorpionfoot winced when he heard the words come from his mouth. His uncle, Raincloud, had told him never to boast of his own deeds, regardless of how noteworthy or true. Let others tell your tales, he had said, and you will be thought of as a humble person and modest. Besides, other people will brag about you with more skill than you could ever hope to, and with greater effect. Anyway, Scorpionfoot continued, I went for my second one, a good-sized bull with bad horns, unaware that he had a bad disposition as well. He paused to let the people laugh. He decided to have fun, knowing that an easier audience could not be found. They had all eaten their fill for the first time in weeks. They were all gathered around him in the fire that blazed on the open plain, waiting to hear the rumor of the day made into a tale. So I drew my bow, thinking I would have as easy a time as I had with my first kill, when the bull became curious as to what might be inside my horse. Everyone laughed, with one notable exception. I waited for my horse to move, but she held a straight course like she was tired of living. I looked at my mare, as if that would help me, and saw that another hunter was riding too close to me. She was unable to move even if she wanted to, which I bet she did. The buffalo was almost on me, and I had no time to think. If I had time to think, would I have done what I did? Would anybody? The crowd murmured opinions, not a few of which were, get on with your story. After all, how often would one get a chance to hear what it was like to ride a buffalo? So I jumped off my horse and onto the bull's back. The crowd sighed with pleasure, while Little Bear exhaled with relief. In his mind, he had seen Scorpionfoot say, and as I went to shoot, I saw that a man was about to kick me off my horse and into the path of the buffalo, so I jumped off just in time to save myself. Then he saw Scorpionfoot point a finger his way and say, it was Little Bear who tried to kill me in such a cowardly way. Well, Little Bear, if you want to kill me, here I am. Then he saw Scorpionfoot pull his blade, the man full of the power he had gained from riding the buffalo. And then Little Bear saw his own death. But Little Bear saw no sign that the brave young man had recognized that it was he that had raised a foot against him, only to watch the man he was going to kick into the buffalo jump toward them voluntarily. He saw nothing in Scorpionfoot's eye that told him to watch out, and heard nothing in his voice but the pleasure of the telling. He sat through the rest of the tale, but heard none of it. The only reason he didn't leave was because it wouldn't have looked right. Leaving in the middle of the first telling of such a noteworthy event would have been the height of rudeness, and being noticed was the last thing Little Bear wanted. As he sat there, brewing in his own thoughts while the others thrilled to his enemy's story, Little Bear suddenly realized what he had done. By boxing Scorpion Foot in and forcing him to make his desperate leap, he had helped the killer of his son gain respect and power. Little Bear shook his head in disgust, but he could not escape the truth. Instead of gaining his revenge, he had most likely turned his enemy into a legend. Riding a bull buffalo and walking away unscathed? By all the spirits above and below, who could even think of such a thing? He waited for the young hero to finish, and then rose to leave, knowing his revenge would never come. He could never find the strength to raise a hand against Scorpion Foot again, no matter how underhanded his play. Not many rose with Little Bear, and the youngster spoke for most when they begged for another telling. They will make him tell it so many times he will wish he had never ridden that miserable beast, Little Bear thought. Then he went to look for his two wives who hated each other. What is it you wish to know? Scorpion Foot looked at Buffalo Hair and said, The day I rode the buffalo, I felt great power. I wish to know that power and be able to call upon it when I need it, in battle. Hostilities between the people and their enemies had been almost non-stop of late. Scorpion Foot knew he would soon be called upon to defend his people. He had heard the warriors bragging about their raids and had seen the horses they had stolen or taken from the enemies they had killed. He thought many his age were fools to want to go off risking their necks, but at the same time he felt a strange jealousy of the warriors. They were always getting special treatment and respect. They ate the finest and healthiest cuts of meat, and they got the attention of the women. Have you lain with a young woman yet? Buffalo Hair asked. No. Scorpion Foot felt unnerved at the question. Could the shaman read his thoughts? He tried to think as little as possible, but his mind continued to bubble like a quick stream. It's these cursed silences, Scorpion Foot thought. Why doesn't the old man just talk? I see that you want to ask me why I put this question to you. Before I tell you, I ask you again, what is it you wish to know? Scorpion Foot looked at the old man. He looked at the ugly set of scars above each of his nipples. He looked at the man's left hand and saw that his small finger was almost entirely missing, and part of the next one was gone as well. I wish to know the power that I had as I rode the buffalo. I wish to feel as I did that day. Buffalo Hair looked at the side of his lodge for a moment before looking back at Scorpion Foot. His eyes were sad. Knowing the power and feeling it are not the same thing. To feel as you did that day with the buffalo was a gift of the great power. To understand the mystery of the great power is not a thing one man may give to another. It must be sought by a man with rigor, and even then it can be like trying to catch a puff of smoke. Do you wish to strive for this knowledge? Scorpion Foot looked again at the priest's mangled hand. He had heard it said that the man chopped off his own fingers in sacrifice and buried them by a tree. Then the man hung himself on that same tree with skewers through his chest. Buffalo Hair had hung from the skewers, it was said, without eating or drinking, until his vision came. Others had spoken this of Buffalo Hair. For him to speak it of himself would take away the power he had gained by doing such a thing. Scorpion Foot looked at the man's hand again. Could he do a thing like that? To feel as he did riding the buffalo? It would be a small price. I want to know this mystery you speak of. Buffalo Hair looked at Scorpion Foot. The boy was already touched by the spirits. A fool could see it, so who is he to stand in their way? I asked you if you had yet been with a woman, because to know would help me decide on which path to put your feet. There are two ways to gain the knowledge. The first is the way of emptiness. It involves solitude and the foregoing of all comforts, such as food and drink. You would be bound and taught to pray and beseech the spirits to guide you. The second is the path of suffering, a path you have tread on before. The body must be broken and the senses confounded to allow the great power to speak to you. The great power speaks to us at all times, but the body of a man enslaves his mind so that he cannot hear the words. Since you have not known women, yours is the way of emptiness. Scorpionfoot sat and digested these words while Buffalo Hair rose and took something from the wall. He handed it to the young man at his feet. Take this pipe and light it with a coal from the fire. Scorpionfoot took the 2 sticks that were tied in the middle with sinew from beside the little fire. He used the tongs to spear a coal, then he held the coal to the pipe. Draw on it hard, son, the shaman instructed as he resumed his seat. When the boy had the pipe glowing, Buffalo Hair said, Pray now to the great power and ask for wisdom. When you exhale the smoke, mingle it with the smoke of the fire. Your prayers will ride that smoke to the heavens. Pray also that you will be able to withstand the trials of your life. They both watched the black-gray spiral climb through the hole at the top of the medicine lodge. At least he did not choke on the smoke of his prayers, Buffalo Hair thought. Scorpionfoot sat in front of the water and allowed the bitter herbs to do their work. Buffalo Hair had given him 2 pouches, one with the herbs and one with the moonflower. You will need the moonflower to calm you after you have taken of the herbs, Buffalo Hair had said. He had gotten to know the shaman and thought him a good and holy man. He had given him the herbs as a final measure of sorts. Suffering and exposure to cold had not brought Scorpionfoot his vision. No spirit came to him, like the buffalo spirit that spoke to the old medicine man in a dream. All his prayers and beseechings had gone unheeded. All he had accomplished was to make himself sickly and weak. He looked at the 2 bones of his lower arm, where they stuck out at the joint of his elbow, and he felt disgust. Do I have to go to the spirits and introduce myself in person for them to speak to me? He thought. Should I start lopping off body parts until they either notice me or I whittle myself down to nothing? He was alarmed at the tone of these thoughts, but then he realized that it was the herbs speaking. He suddenly felt ill and began to retch, his body convulsing and empty. He then became afraid. Night was falling. He was some ways out of camp, sitting by a small water hole. He could feel himself drifting out of his right mind, and when he closed his eyes, he could literally feel himself drift. Suppose the spirits did come. Who could say they wouldn't be evil? Who could know whether they might send a bear to eat him, or enemies to torture and kill him? Scorpionfoot heard Rain Cloud's voice as clearly as he had heard the leaves rustling. When your mind starts working against you, turn it aside by putting it to work. Find a way to occupy it. He thought of his uncle and it indeed calmed him. Rain Cloud had helped him and made his life easier. His uncle couldn't make the others like him, but he had taught him some important things and had given him Milkweed. Milkweed was a good horse, and she almost never bit him or stepped on his feet anymore. He saw himself riding Milkweed into battle like it had already happened, and he was drawing on memories. He saw the knife he carried dripping with blood and his quiver empty of arrows. Am I to be a man of blood, a warrior? He asked aloud. Buffalo Hair had said that when his vision or spirit animal came, there would be no question, there would be no doubt. It must be the herbs again, he told himself, and began to reel at the images that played through him. He saw some of the young women in his mind so clearly that he felt his body responding like they were really there. The last couple of summers, he had begun to notice the young women, even some of the older women, in a different way. He flicked the hardness that poked up between his leggings with a forefinger. My trusty companions, Little Oak and his 2 acorns, my only friends. He suddenly felt great sadness. People still treated him as different. The good feeling people had toward him after the buffalo ride didn't last. People still spoke of it and told the tale. But he was not called Buffalo Rider. He was still called Scorpionfoot, Scorpionfoot the Killer, Scorpionfoot, object of fear. He even thought of calling himself Buffalo Rider. It was a great name and spoke of a great deed. It would be good to carry such a name. But one could not name oneself. People named you and called you what they would, and he was Scorpionfoot, the one who had killed using only his foot. His sadness became an unbearable ache in his gut. It ate up the fun of the images of war and women, as well as the novelty of the out-of-sorts feeling he had experienced. Night had fallen. He ate the moonflower and hoped only for black sleep and an end to the unbearable gnawing in his stomach. It had been many days filled with suffering and prayer, fasting and pain. Maybe the spirits have abandoned me. Maybe that is my vision, and I am refusing to see it. Scorpionfoot snapped awake at the crack of thunder. He watched lightning flash to the north as a thunderstorm passed over the plain. His heart was beating furiously and his head spun. Lightning flashed again, and the thunder boomed once more in its tardiness. Scorpionfoot watched the spectacle, seeing nothing else. Then the lightning flashed yet again, only this time it didn't strike the plain. This time it struck itself, and the burning wheel spun in the sky. The sky fire had bitten itself, and it whirled and grew bright, so bright Scorpionfoot's eyes burned. As the sight became unbearable, tiny fingers of lightning shot from the wheel like florid trails of sparks from a weapon-maker's stone. Scorpionfoot saw the sparks hit everywhere and everything, including him, before his eyes became blotted out in whiteness. For a time he shook in blindness, and he could not move. And he wanted to move. He wanted to run and shout and scream that his vision had come. He had seen something no one had seen, no one could see. He had seen a thing he had never heard described from a dream. He shook in rapture and joy. For how could he know then the true power of what he had seen? He only tasted its sweetness, and would taste it for some time. How could he know that he had taken the final step away from those he went back to that morning, that he would become something as different from them as the earth from the sky? How could he know that now he would be alone for the rest of his life? He would soon take a wife, but little comfort she would give him, and soon Buffalo Hair would die of a pain in the stomach. It was just as well he did. If he had lived a little longer, Scorpionfoot would have killed him in a way that would have taken longer than a day and been much more painful.